October 1972. The Sea of Okhotsk. A lone American submarine drifts silently through waters claimed by the Soviet Union, her hull painted black, her mission known only to a handful of men in Washington. 400 feet below the freezing surface, elite Navy divers emerge from a pressurized chamber disguised as a rescue vehicle. Breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen to survive the crushing depths, they walk across the dark seafloor in complete silence. Their target is a cable roughly 3 to 4 inches wide buried beneath the sand, a thread of copper and insulation that carries the most closely guarded secrets of the Soviet Pacific Fleet. What these men are about to do will reshape the balance of the Cold War. They are about to tap into the voice of the enemy itself. This is the story of the USS Halibut, a submarine that began her life as an obsolete missile boat and became the most important intelligence platform the United States Navy ever operated. For years, she would slip into hostile waters, deploy her divers, and record the unfiltered conversations of Soviet commanders, their fears, their strategies, and their weaknesses. It was the greatest wiretapping operation in American history, and it remained secret for decades. To understand how the Halibut became a spy submarine, one must first understand what she was built to be. Her keel was laid down at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California, on April 11, 1957. She was launched on January 9, 1959, and commissioned on January 4, 1960. Originally designated SSGN 587, the Halibut was the first nuclear-powered submarine specifically designed from the ground up to carry and launch guided missiles. Her primary weapon was the Regulus cruise missile, a jet-powered nuclear warhead carrier that had to be fired from the surface. The submarine carried up to 5 Regulus missiles in a massive internal hangar that dominated her forward section, giving her an unusual appearance that sailors compared to a snake digesting a large meal. At 350 feet in length with a beam of 29 feet, the Halibut displaced 5,000 tons submerged. Her S-3W nuclear reactor drove 2 turbines that could push her through the water at more than 20 knots underwater. She was a unique vessel, unlike anything else in the American fleet. Between February 1961 and July 1964, the Halibut conducted 7 deterrent patrols in the Western Pacific, carrying nuclear-armed missiles that could strike Soviet targets, including the major naval base at Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula. These patrols represented some of the earliest submarine-based nuclear deterrent operations in history, predating even the Polaris missile submarines that would eventually replace her. But by 1964, the Regulus program was obsolete. The Polaris ballistic missile could be fired from underwater, making the surface-launched Regulus dangerously vulnerable. The Navy canceled the program, and the Halibut suddenly found herself without a purpose. Her massive missile hangar sat empty, her crew wondering what would become of their unusual boat. The answer came from a brilliant scientist named John Craven, who saw something valuable where others saw only obsolescence. Craven was the chief scientist of the Navy's Special Projects Office and director of the Deep Submergence Systems Project. After the nuclear submarine USS Thresher sank in 1963 with 129 men aboard, Craven had been tasked with developing the capability to locate and recover objects from the deep ocean floor. He needed a submarine that could hover in place, lower cameras miles into the abyss, and scout the ocean bottom for items of military significance. When he was offered a choice between the USS Seawolf and the USS Halibut for conversion, he chose the Halibut. Her cavernous missile hangar could be transformed into something far more valuable than a weapons bay. In February 1965, Craven was awarded $70 million to outfit the Halibut with electronic, sonic, photographic, and video equipment that would turn her into the most sophisticated underwater spy platform ever created. The submarine entered Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard for a complete transformation. On August 15, 1965, she was redesignated as an attack submarine with the hull classification symbol SSN 587, but this was merely a cover. What emerged from that shipyard was something entirely new in the history of naval warfare. The engineering modifications to the Halibut were revolutionary. Her former missile hangar became what the crew called the Bat Cave, a reference to the comic book superhero's secret lair. This space was packed with cutting-edge surveillance equipment including a Sperry Univac 1224 mainframe computer, an extraordinarily sophisticated machine for its era. The Batcave also contained a photographic darkroom, long-range and short-range side-looking sonar systems, and video equipment that could process imagery in real time. A well beneath the Batcave allowed the deployment of two remotely operated underwater vehicles nicknamed Fish. These 12-foot-long devices weighed 2 tons each and were equipped with cameras, strobe lights, and sonar, capable of searching the ocean floor at depths of up to 25,000 feet, far deeper than any manned submarine could dive. But the most important modification was mounted on the Halibut's rear deck. To outside observers, it appeared to be a deep submergence rescue vehicle simulator, a training device for the Navy's new underwater rescue program. This was a carefully crafted deception. The apparent mini-submarine was actually a pressurized saturation diving habitat, a chamber where elite Navy divers could live for extended periods at the crushing pressures of the deep ocean. This technology had been developed secretly through the Sea Lab program, underwater habitats off the Florida coast, where divers had lived at deep-sea pressure for weeks at a time. The techniques pioneered in Sea Lab would prove essential to the Halibut's most dangerous missions. The submarine also received side thrusters and anchoring winches with mushroom anchors fore and aft that allowed her to hover motionless on the seafloor. 4 skids were added to her lower hull, allowing her to safely land on the ocean bottom. Induction, tapping, and recording equipment was installed along with specialized oceanographic sensors. When the conversion was complete, the Halibut was no longer a weapon of war in the traditional sense. She had become something far more valuable, a platform for stealing secrets from the enemy. The Halibut's first major mission came in August 1968 when she was tasked with locating the sunken Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129. The Golf-class submarine had disappeared on March 8 of that year approximately 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, sinking to a depth of nearly 16,000 feet with her nuclear-armed missiles still aboard. The Soviet Navy searched for months, but never found her wreck. American intelligence detected the submarine's destruction through the SOSUS hydrophone network, which recorded an acoustic event suggesting an explosion or implosion. Using this data, analysts narrowed the probable wreck site to an area of roughly 1,200 square miles, an impossible search zone for conventional methods. The Halibut was sent to find the needle in this vast haystack. For 3 weeks, her crew operated the Fish, sending the remotely controlled vehicles deep into the abyss while the technicians in the Batcave studied the grainy video feeds. Against all odds, they succeeded. The Halibut located the shattered remains of the K-129 3 miles beneath the surface, lying in 2 major pieces on the ocean floor. Over the following weeks, the submarine took more than 20,000 close-up photographs of every aspect of the wreck, providing American intelligence with their first detailed look at a Soviet ballistic missile submarine. This intelligence coup led directly to one of the most audacious operations of the Cold War. President Richard Nixon authorized the Central Intelligence Agency to attempt recovery of the submarine, a project that would become known as Azorian. The CIA commissioned the construction of a massive ship called the Hughes Glomar Explorer, built under the cover story that it was a manganese nodule mining vessel owned by the reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes. In 1974, the Glomar Explorer attempted to raise the K-129 using a giant mechanical claw nicknamed Clementine. The operation encountered catastrophic mechanical failure during the lift. Several of the massive steel claws fractured, causing approximately 2/3 of the already raised section to break away and fall back to the ocean floor. The recovered portion consisted only of a 38-foot bow section, far smaller than the intelligence services had hoped. This section contained the remains of 6 Soviet sailors who were later given a military burial at sea with full honors, but it did not contain the nuclear-armed ballistic missiles that had been the primary intelligence target. Those remained in the lost sections of the wreck, 3 miles down on the Pacific floor. Despite the partial failure, for her role in discovering the K-129, the Halibut received a classified Presidential Unit Citation signed by President Lyndon Johnson, the highest honor that could be awarded to a submarine. But the Halibut's greatest mission was yet to come. Captain James Bradley of the Office of Naval Intelligence conceived an operation so audacious that it seemed impossible. Bradley, who served as the Undersea Warfare Director beginning in 1966, believed that the Soviet Pacific Fleet relied on an underwater communications cable to connect their major submarine base at Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula with fleet headquarters at Vladivostok on the mainland. He reasoned that because Soviet cryptographers were chronically backlogged and military officers needed rapid communication, the Soviets might be transmitting sensitive information over this cable without encryption. If the United States could tap that cable, they could listen to the enemy's most secret conversations. The obstacles seemed insurmountable. The Sea of Okhotsk was claimed by the Soviet Union as territorial waters. It was strictly off-limits to foreign vessels and heavily patrolled by the Soviet Navy. Underwater sound detection devices lined the seafloor to alert Soviet forces to any intruders. The cable itself, if it existed, would be buried somewhere in over 600,000 square miles of ocean. No one had ever attempted to tap an underwater communications cable at such depths, and the technology to do so did not yet exist. Yet Bradley pressed forward. His conviction stemmed from a childhood memory growing up along the Mississippi River, where signs warned boaters not to anchor near underwater cables. He believed the Soviets would use similar warnings, and that these signs would lead him directly to his target. Bradley pitched his idea in 1971, and the operation moved forward rapidly. Funds were secretly diverted from the Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle program to develop the necessary technology and cover the mission costs. The Halibut was the obvious choice for the mission, already equipped with saturation diving capability, seafloor landing gear, and the advanced electronics needed to support such a complex operation. In October 1972, the Halibut slipped into the Sea of Okhotsk on what would become one of the most critical espionage operations of the Cold War. The crew had been told a cover story claiming they were recovering debris from Soviet anti-ship missile tests, specifically fragments from the SSN-12 Sandbox supersonic anti-ship missile. Only a handful of men aboard knew the true mission. As the submarine cruised slowly along the Siberian coastline, her crew scanned the shore through the periscope. Bradley's intuition proved correct. They spotted warning signs in Cyrillic script, telling fishermen not to anchor in certain areas. These signs led directly to the cable. The technicians in the Batcave deployed the fish, scanning the seafloor with sonar and video cameras. Within days, they located a cable approximately 3 to 4 inches wide at a depth of roughly 400 feet, only about 120 miles off the Soviet coast. The Halibut carefully settled near the ocean floor, deploying her mushroom anchors to hold position. Then the saturation divers went to work. The conditions were brutal. The water temperature hovered just above freezing. The divers wore specialized suits supplied with hot water through umbilical lines to prevent hypothermia. They breathed a helium-oxygen mixture through Westinghouse Mark 11 abalone rebreathers, equipment so advanced that the civilian world would not see anything comparable for decades. The helium allowed them to work at depth for extended periods because it leaves human tissue more rapidly than nitrogen, reducing the risk of decompression sickness. These men would spend days living at deep sea pressure inside the submarine's external chamber, making multiple excursions to the seafloor before beginning the long process of decompression at the end of their mission. The divers found the cable and used pneumatic air guns to blow away sand and debris. They then wrapped a 20-foot-long recording device around the cable, a sophisticated tap that used electromagnetic induction to capture the communications flowing through without piercing the cable's outer casing. This was crucial because any damage to the cable would alert the Soviets to the intrusion. The device was also designed to automatically detach and fall to the ocean floor if the cable was ever raised for maintenance, leaving no evidence of American espionage. The cover story about recovering missile debris proved useful in an unexpected way. The Navy actually carried out the fake mission with remarkable success. Divers recovered more than 2 million pieces of debris from Soviet SSN-12 Sandbox missile tests, with no single fragment larger than 6 inches. This material was taken back to the Naval Research Laboratory where it was reconstructed and the missile was reverse-engineered. Intelligence analysts discovered that the Sandbox missile used radar guidance only, not the infrared seeker they had previously suspected. The cover story had produced its own intelligence windfall. When the Halibut returned to the United States with her recordings from the cable tap, the tapes were rushed to the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. What the analysts discovered exceeded their wildest expectations. The Soviets were so confident in the security of their underwater cable that the vast majority of conversations transmitted over it were completely unencrypted. American intelligence suddenly had access to raw, unfiltered communications between senior Soviet naval commanders. They heard discussions of tactics, equipment problems, patrol schedules, and maintenance issues. They learned about missile capabilities, submarine deployments, and nuclear readiness. They even listened to personal phone calls between officers and their families. It was, as one intelligence official later described it, like placing a glass against the Soviet Union's wall to hear their every word. The operation, codenamed Ivy Bells, continued for years. The Halibut made return trips to the Sea of Okhotsk in 1974 and 1975 to retrieve recorded tapes and install new recording devices. The technology improved over time. Bell Laboratories, working secretly for the Navy, developed more advanced tapping devices powered by radioisotope thermoelectric generators containing plutonium-238 that could store a full year's worth of data. This eliminated the need for frequent retrieval missions, reducing the risk of detection. The intelligence gathered proved invaluable, helping American negotiators during strategic arms limitation talks and providing crucial insights into Soviet military thinking. The Halibut was decommissioned on June 30, 1976, after completing over 1,200 dives during her 16.5 years of service. She had earned 2 Presidential Unit citations and numerous other awards for operations so secret that most of her crew never knew the full extent of what they had accomplished. But Operation Ivy Bells continued under other submarines, most notably the USS Parche, a modified Sturgeon-class attack submarine that would become the most decorated vessel in United States naval history. The USS Richard Russell also participated in cable tapping operations. These submarines expanded the program, tapping additional Soviet cables in the Barents Sea, the White Sea, and other strategic locations around the world. The missions remained extraordinarily dangerous. During one tape retrieval mission in the late 1970s, the USS Parche encountered a violent storm while operating in the Sea of Okhotsk. The seas bucked the submarine until her anchor line snapped, and she began rising uncontrollably toward the surface, with divers still tethered outside. If the submarine surfaced in Soviet territorial waters, the mission would be exposed, and an international crisis would erupt. If the divers were pulled up too quickly, they would die from rapid decompression. The captain ordered the submarine's ballast tanks flooded, driving the Parche back down until she hit the seafloor with enough force to allow the divers to scramble back into their pressurized habitat. But now the submarine was dangerously mired in the sediment. The crew executed a risky emergency blow using compressed air to blast free, followed immediately by a crash dive to prevent breaching the surface. They had only enough compressed air for one attempt. The maneuver worked, and the submarine limped home with her precious cargo of intelligence. Such was the danger that the men of the cable tapping program faced on every mission. In January 1980, a 44-year-old former National Security Agency analyst named Ronald Pelton walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington. Pelton had resigned from the NSA in 1979 after filing for bankruptcy. With crushing debts and only a few $100s to his name, he decided to sell what he knew. Among the secrets Pelton revealed was the existence of Operation Ivy Bells. The KGB paid him $5,000 for this information alone, with additional payments totaling roughly $35,000 over the following years for other intelligence he provided. Pelton had no classified documents to offer, but possessed an exceptional memory and encyclopedic knowledge of NSA operations that made him extraordinarily valuable to Soviet intelligence. The Soviets did not act immediately on Pelton's information. Some intelligence analysts believe they may have used the compromised cable to feed disinformation back to American intelligence services before removing the tap. Whatever the reason for the delay, in 1981, American surveillance satellites detected Soviet warships, including a salvage vessel anchored directly over the location of the Okhotsk tap. The USS Parche was dispatched to recover the device, but when her divers descended to the seafloor, they found the recording pod gone. The Soviets had removed it. The 6-ton device, still marked as property of the United States government, was taken into Soviet custody and kept classified for years. It was not until after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union dissolved that the captured tapping device was placed on public display at the former KGB Museum in Moscow, where it remains as a trophy of Cold War espionage. The identity of the traitor remained unknown until July 1985, when a KGB colonel named Vitaly Yurchenko defected to the United States. Yurchenko had been Pelton's original contact at the Soviet embassy and provided information that allowed the FBI to identify the red-haired former analyst. The FBI combed through NSA personnel files, creating a pool of red-haired male analysts, and eventually matched Pelton's voice to a recorded phone call he had made to the Soviet embassy years earlier. Pelton was arrested in November 1985 and convicted of espionage in 1986. He was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms plus 10 years. Intelligence officials later concluded that Pelton may have done more damage than any other traitor in NSA history. He served nearly 30 years in federal prison before being released on parole in 2015 and died in September 2022. The legacy of the USS Halibut extends far beyond her own operational career. The techniques pioneered aboard her transformed American submarine intelligence operations. Saturation diving from submarines became a standard capability for special mission vessels. The remotely operated underwater vehicles she deployed were predecessors to the sophisticated ROVs used by the Navy today. Cable tapping operations continued through the remainder of the Cold War, with the USS Parche earning 10 Presidential Unit citations, 9 Navy Unit citations, and 13 Expeditionary Awards for her classified missions, more honors than any vessel in American naval history. The modern successor to these pioneering spy submarines is the USS Jimmy Carter, a heavily modified Seawolf-class submarine commissioned in 2005. Her hull was extended by 100 feet to accommodate the multi-mission platform, a specialized compartment housing, advanced equipment for undersea cable operations, remotely operated vehicle deployment, and special forces missions. The techniques that Craven's engineers developed, and the Halibut's crew perfected, remain at the heart of American submarine intelligence gathering in the 21st century. The USS Halibut was struck from the Naval Vessel Register on April 30, 1986. She entered the Navy's nuclear-powered ship and submarine recycling program on July 12, 1993, and ceased to exist as a complete vessel on September 9, 1994. Her reactor removed, her hull cut apart, her secrets finally laid to rest. In April 1997, the surviving officers and men who had served aboard her during the Regulus deterrent patrols were finally authorized to wear the Submarine Ballistic Missile Patrol insignia, decades after they had earned it. She was an ugly duckling, an obsolete missile boat that outlived her original purpose. She was a vessel that looked like nothing else in the fleet, with her bulging hangar and strange appendages. But within her peculiar hull, the USS Halibut carried some of the bravest men in the submarine service, men who dove into freezing darkness hundreds of feet beneath the surface, in waters patrolled by the enemy. Men who risked capture and death to gather intelligence that may have helped prevent a nuclear war. They listened to the enemy's secrets, recorded their fears, and brought that knowledge home to a nation that never knew their names. The submarine that began as a failed experiment became the most important spy platform of the Cold War, proving that in the shadow world of intelligence, the most valuable weapons are not those that destroy but those that reveal.